Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode 43 of International Expansion Explained. My guest today is Richard Burrage, who has 35 years of experience in market research and consulting. He spent the last 28 years of that in Vietnam, where he assists brands in developing and building their position to be leaders in the market. He's the founder of the market research agency Cimigo, and he regularly speaks about consumer trends, innovation, advertising, and customer experience. So, as you can tell, he really enjoys guiding clients through innovation and has facilitated the creation of over 60 brands in Vietnam. Aside from that, he's also a trustee of Saigon Children's Charity, which seeks to remove barriers in education. And he teaches Asian consumer behaviour for the Quinlan Business School at Loyola University in Chicago. He is, however, a British national still, um, and lives in Ho Chi Minh City with his three children and is a runner, I've realised, and has completed 27 marathons, it said on your LinkedIn profile, which
This is
makes you a
true.
madman. A madman. Welcome to the show, Richard, and thank you for taking the time today.
Not at all, Catherine. Thanks for having me. And I am British, although my accent's been beaten out of me over the years. So I'll try my best to come back to it.
It's pretty much the same with mine as well. When I listen back to stuff, I'm just like, oh, you do sound German, which is quite distressing at times.
Well, when I hear my children speak, it's like, really? British forebears? But anyway, okay.
Oh, yeah, what happened? But anyway, before I start out with questions, if people are listening live on LinkedIn, especially, maybe you could just drop us a comment in the chat, just so that we have that reassurance that we are actually live and not merely talking to ourselves. Because whilst I'm sure we can have a wonderful conversation, it is so much nicer if we can take some of you guys with us. So, whilst we're waiting for the multitude of comments to come through, Richard, maybe you can
Hopefully
just
some interesting questions.
and hopefully some interesting questions and no heckling. Maybe you can just give us a quick rundown. How did you get into international business, and how did you end up in Vietnam? How did that come about?
So, yes. So, short story-ish. I had an uncle who used to teach in Tokyo, and he'd do a semester there. He'd teach at LSE in London, and then he would teach at Jose University. And he said one day to his son, not to me, why don't you go to Japan? And this was 1992-ish. And, just spend a few months there learning about Japan. At the time, Japanese management style was what we were taught in business school and all these sorts of things. But my cousin, bless him, wasn't very interested, but I put my hand up and said, I'll go. And I never really came home. I went to Japan. I then traveled around the region, ended up working in market research in Hong Kong, did a few studies in Vietnam. And after 4 years in Hong Kong, I thought I'd better go somewhere where I can, no longer skim the surface of every market in the region, but sort of dig in deep. So I came to Vietnam in 97 and set up Cimigo in 2003.
Wow, 2003 was the year that or 2002 actually, was the year that I started working with Vietnam for the first time as well.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was coming in from 94 when, back in those days, I'd have a public security tag with me everywhere I went. It was a little bit more sensitive back then, but it became a lot easier in the late 90s. But yes.
Yeah. And things have changed a lot since then, for sure.
Formidably, yes.
Yeah. And I think that these days, when you hear about Vietnam, I mean, from my side, because I've done a lot of work in East Asia, done a lot of work in Southeast Asia, and when I'm looking at what materials and what reports and information are out there, if you're looking for information on the Chinese market, there are tons of reports. There's stuff coming out every week. There are loads of people who are who were running companies in the region and who were talking about it. But even though Vietnam is kind of touted as the new up and coming market, there's really not so much information coming out, up to date information about Vietnam. I always feel it can be quite difficult to get, let's say, balanced pictures of what's going on the ground on a week to week basis if you're not coming in and out of the market every couple of months.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, there's a dearth of secondary information, which makes market understanding sometimes a bit hard. It's great if you're a primary research company like me, but yeah, there is a lack of background information on any specific sector that you might be looking at, which can be quite frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, it's often quite frustrating. Even news articles, it's not always that much that you can find.
Yeah, and to be fair, even the international press, sometimes they kind of they hit on a story, but they really miss the underlying currents on that story because I guess their correspondents don't have feet on the ground. So yeah, it is difficult. We try our best to help. We have a consumer intelligence platform with lots of syndicated data on it from reports that we do for ourselves. So it is getting better. But yes, it can be quite frustrating.
Okay. And I mean, a lot of European brands, they see Vietnam as very much a high growth consumption story. But do you, just moving on from what you mentioned before, do you feel that that's a slightly misleading narrative? Because I always feel there's been a lot of discussion about Vietnam as the kind of China +1 on the basis of production, where I also have my, let's say, I also have my doubts, because Vietnam is wonderful. I love Vietnam. But from a size perspective, Vietnam simply cannot replace China. And I do think that it can be a high growth consumption story, but it's not as simple. The roads are not paved with gold, and it's not as simple as come and they will buy your product, is it?
No, I mean, when you look back over the last sort of 25 years, it was much easier for particularly FMCG players when they were coming into a market with kind of real mass items that were under 50 cents a unit. And there was great intrigue in the market because they were new products into the market that people hadn't seen before. Now it's much harder. The growth story is, of course, it's high growth, but it's from a small base. And the China +1, I hope mostly refers to, a production supply chain strategy rather than assuming it's a consumption sort of led story in the China +1. But and we have two main prongs of the economy. The economy over the last 25 years has done extraordinarily well, but mostly on the back of high female participation in the labor force, super high, like nearly 90%. Young demographic. So, those 2 points, particularly the female participation, has been the real demographic dividend, if you like. And production for export. So, the foreign direct investment is primarily driven at manufacturing base to export. And of course, some of that trickles down into the consumer economy. Up until COVID, the consumer economy would probably average on, so I'm talking retail consumer demand, somewhere between 9 and 14% per annum growth. It's much lower now. It's more like 6 to 7%, but it remains from a small base. So the PR machine that is the government, that is everybody who wants to attract foreign investment, there are a lot of interests and stakeholders there. They talk about macro numbers, particularly GDP growth and GDP per capita, but they can be a little bit misleading. That doesn't translate into a shopping basket and increased spend in the shopping basket.
Yeah. And I mean, in the past, when I was coming in, I was working in infant nutrition. And so, of course, we profited to a large extent from that very high female employment rate. And of course, the very high birth rate that Vietnam has in comparison with many other Asian markets, at least. let's say.
But Vietnam had. So, even that is down to 1.39 child per woman, in last year. So it's actually shockingly low now, because the cost of raising a child, they take a hold on people's budgets. Yeah. So actually, the fastest growing part of the population today are the over 50s. They're people like me. And in fact, if I look within that over 50s, it's the over 80s and then the over 70s. The young population is shrinking quite rapidly. We've got a good dozen years ahead of us before we can really say we're an aging society. And then there'll be all sorts of pressure because, I alluded to the high female participation rate driving growth for various reasons. But also that means a low dependency ratio, right? So if you've got one or two children, as it used to be, you don't have too many dependents on a joint income. But increasingly, we're going to have a lot of elderly dependents or senior dependents, which will also cause pressure on household budgets. So there's a good sort of solid 12 years ahead of us. I don't know if you've heard about the Vietnamese government sort of wanting to be a high-income country and by 2045, and they're kind of setting themselves a deadline, and that's really driven by the aging population. Because they know that fundamentally the structure of the population and the impact on society and spending really starts to change in a dozen years. Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's true that you can definitely see that massive change. And of course, all of those females who are still in the working population, they are very much that sandwich generation, aren't they? They're looking after, because they're often living in a multi-generational household. Yep. Where they're living with their parents and possibly even their grandparents these days at the younger end of that, and dealing with young kids and working in an Asian country full-time Asian, not full-time Europe, 35 hours a week in France.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. So that's one side of it. You're right. Multi-general homes, and actually often different multiple budgets within one living structure, which causes some complication for marketers. But there's also another shift happening in the cities. The skylines have changed dramatically to apartment complexes.
Yeah.
And so you've got a lot of people who the desire and the aspiration is not to live with extended family. I don't, if I was a female Vietnamese, I don't really want to get married and live with my husband's family and have to look after them as well as my own, which is typically what's been happening for centuries. I'd rather live in an apartment where it's just my nuclear family. But again, as the society starts to age, well, it sort of says, well, who's going to look after the seniors in the market? Because the social net and the retirement funds don't really exist like they would exist in Europe. So there's going to be a lot of policy pressure and a lot of social pressures, in a dozen years or so.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a question. Certainly amongst my group of acquaintances and friends, a lot more of them have been, like you say, moving into those nuclear family apartments and out of the multi-generational households.
Yeah. So there are challenges to come with the aging population. There's also some good sides of it. I mean, it's one that marketers seem to ignore, probably because they're all under 30. And some of them, I mean, not all of them, obviously, some of them have amassed wealth and therefore, have the ability to spend on services and experiences and products. But so there is an opportunity there as well. So I call it the silver generation, because there's some silver to be had there if you're a marketer. But, it will also cause some pressure on the idea of these sort of high growth levels in GDP that we've had historically.
And so if you had to pick kind of one metric that exporters over rely on when they're assessing Vietnam, what do you think that it would be, and what should they be looking at instead?
So it's typically, there's 100 million,
there's a massive population and there's massive growth. Yeah.
And there's this sense that, it's all middle class, and the GDP per capita. These are kind of that they are PR metrics and they're good, but they don't really equate to the quality of consumption. So, if you just break it down into a consuming class, the people with an affordability to buy something discretionary, and then look at the concentration of those people and where they are, then you get a more realistic view of what sort of market it is you might be entering. Because to attack, there are roughly 27 million households who I would call consuming class. The average size is 3.4. So they have discretionary income to spend on food or beverages. But that's, there's more of those in rural than there are in urban areas. And when you're looking at entering a market like this, a lot of people often are only focusing on a key city or two key cities, particularly for exporters. And then your market diminishes radically. So you really need to understand your category size and your price structure and price position in that category to really understand what the opportunity is. There is a lot of hype, of course, but smart people move beyond the hype. But, many of the private equity people, for example, focus only on the hype.
Yeah. And I think if we're talking, especially if you're talking FMCG, a lot of Europeans, I mean, I've seen brands in the past who've been like, oh, Metro is there. And I'm just like, no, Metro in Vietnam. No. They kind of look at it and they see that on paper, there are a number of international players, and they don't realize that those international players are not going to cover the whole of the market for them.
Sure.
And that there's still a huge part of the market that runs through what you might call traditional types of channels, independent
markets. There's roughly 1.3 to 1.4 million of those covering the country. For food, that are relevant for food or packaged beverages. There are, I forget the exact numbers, something like 16,500 modern trade outlets.
Yep.
So you've got 1.3 million of your mum and pop stores, your wet markets. You've got 16,500, if you want the real data, go to my website, but modern trade outlets. So you can see that disparity, right? It's a very different cost of distribution and cost of market access to be able to play in that traditional trade.
And
so the traditional trade is what mum and pop shops and wet markets.
Yeah. And I think that brands often underestimate. They think that they can cover the whole market with just modern trade, rather than flipping that on its head and saying, my addressable market is modern trade.
And e-com, maybe.
And e-commerce. And e-commerce, of course.
Yeah. So in a way, it's sort of, I mean, if you were an early mover here, if you came from, Heineken beer or I don't know which infant formula brand you work for, but Dutch Lady or Friesland Campina, or you were British American Tobacco, you invested heavily in that distribution to the 1.3 million outlets, because the modern trade didn't exist in 2000. In the year 2000, it represented less than 1% of sales. So you had to. But now, if you're coming in and you're a niche, I don't know, functional health beverage out of Europe, you can make a decision that my addressable market will just be what I can reach through e-com or what I can reach through modern trade. I don't need the distributor setup, the wholesaler setup, the feet on the ground to visit 1.3 million stores or a proportion thereof. So that also intensifies competition, because you see a lot more functional health drinks entering the market because they can just take a view on one particular channel.
Yes.
And sometimes a couple of brands within that particular channel. Yeah.
No, and I know that on some of the work, because some of the LinkedIn posts that I've seen from you over the last few months, you've also talked about that confidence gap, which is one that I've come across often a lot, that on paper, you see that somebody would have the disposable income to buy your product. And if you do a focus group interview with them, they also would say, yes, of course, I would buy organic infant formula, or I would buy, I don't know, whatever aspirational premium product it is that you're looking to sell in large quantities on the market. But they don't put their money where their mouth is necessarily.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that is something that lots of brands, they underestimate how big that gap is, I think.
Yeah, it's a very I mean, I've you know, like you, over my years I've done a work around a lot of Asia, not Europe, but Asia, in different markets, and the price knowledge of a shopper here is staggering. You know, there are methods in pricing research which you can't do in Europe because the consumer doesn't have the price knowledge. In here, you can meet a mum and pop store owner, or just a woman who's doing her groceries that day. Their price knowledge is just phenomenal. So they are extremely price sensitive and cautious, and they just have them. They have and often looking for offers and deals and promotions. That it's just astounding. And the other thing with price sensitivity that's very, very unique here, it also happens in Indonesia, but it's not just price for value, it's cash outlay.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, yes, I'd like to try this large bottle of functional health beverage, but I don't have the cash to spend the $1.50 on that. But if you put it in a package that's a quarter of the size, then maybe I can spend 20 cents. It becomes cash outlay wise, the cash out I have in my pocket available today, it becomes affordable and offers me a value. So cash outlay is something that most European and North American marketers just don't understand. Unless they've worked in these countries, it's not something that's ever been relevant to them.
No, but when I started out in infant nutrition, it was something that we came across in Eastern Europe.
Right.
But not so much in our products. It was more in things like nappies, that if you went into mum and pop stores, I remember going into mum and pop stores in Latvia, and they would sell single nappies out of a multi-pack because of the way also that wages were structured, that a lot of people were kind of day wage earners at that particular point in time. We're talking 2001, something like that. And so, the mum would come in and she would buy maybe enough for the day, and she would come in the next day when she got the next set of wages. And I think that all of those things are things that do change over time. Suddenly it tips into a slightly different situation. But when you're in the middle of it, then you as a marketer very much have to be aware of that question: where is it that consumers are willing to spend? Yeah. And so that would be my next question to you. Where are consumers at the moment still willing to spend, and where are they maybe just trading down a little bit? And maybe that the answer to that has probably changed in the last few weeks with the present fuel situation and madness.
More turmoil, aren't we lucky?
Yes.
Yeah. So, obviously people still spend on daily essentials. They still spend on small gratifications rather than expensive gratifications. So, a bubble tea, to cheer up my afternoon, or, a milk tea or a bubble tea. They'll still spend on a reasonably priced cafe, and enjoy the moment. Where they're most likely to spend premium, which is, I think, what you're probably asking, is gifting around special occasions. Mm-hmm. So Tet, which is the Lunar New Year we've had, people will splash out on Tet. Anything to do with the child, so avoiding diaper rashes, good infant formula with a great origin story and great benefits. They will spend. The mothers in this market, mothers and fathers, to be fair, will sacrifice an awful lot to give their children the best start in life. an awful lot, more than any other market I've seen. As a comparison, in Indonesia, the father gets put first. It's a very patriarchal society.
Yep.
Here, everything is sacrificed for the child. Hopefully the child has opportunities that perhaps the parents feel they did not get. So small gratifications, gifting for real special occasions like the Lunar New Year, nearly anything to do with children, particularly for safety and particularly for health benefit. And then also wellness. Wellness is a category, health and wellness. People are willing to spend a premium there. And that does translate into fresh produce also. So, possibly, dairy is one it translates to, but also, fruits, vegetables and that sort of thing it will translate into as well. And supplements, to be fair. Yeah.
I guess the supplement market has, across the whole region, had a massive boom post-pandemic.
And to tie that back into something you said earlier, of course, here I can go into a pharmacy, literally buy anything over the counter that I couldn't do in my home country of the UK. So I don't need a prescription. I might legally, but in practice I don't. But I will also buy medicine. I will be given a number of pills. I'd like two of those, or supplements. I'd like 5 of those. Again, that comes back to that earlier cash outlay point. But yeah, the retailers that are mum and pop shops and pharmacies will break bundles down.
Yep.
Take the strips out of the pack, cut them into half, etc., to make those products available and accessible financially.
Yeah. And what would be the kind of criteria? Because of course, lots of imported food and drinks brands look to position themselves. They have to position themselves basically as premium when they go into the Vietnamese market, even if they're maybe only, let's say, average kind of quality in their, or average positioning in their home country. But which kind of criteria would you say justify that premium price in Vietnam right now?
So are we sticking with food and beverages?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, for food and beverages, origin is an awesome story, but it's not to say I'm from France. It needs to be more of an origin story and a justification of that story. So an authentic brand story that sticks into the origin can be fabulous. Functional benefits around health and wellness, going back to the earlier conversation.
Is
trust is interesting because trust. God.
I was just going to ask you if functional benefits are less of a wild east than they used to be in Vietnam, because of course brands like Meal used to make all kinds of claims.
Yeah, your child's going to be Mozart, right? It's still very much an ingredient-led war in a lot of those categories. So, ingredient proof points that consumers don't necessarily understand, but it's still, probably when you were here, it was DHA and AA to brain development type messaging, from reason to believe to the functional benefit. It's still going on, to be honest. People look for, particularly mums, they look for those sort of tick marks, if you like, that tell them that help them rationalize the decision they're making. But there is also quite a simultaneous move, oddly, to much more clean labeling. So, for example, you mentioned, organic infant formula earlier. It's niche, but it's growing, and it's very much imported product, and it's very much origin stories. But yeah, it is truly happening. So, but it is quite odd when you see those sort of focus groups that kind of, I want clean, but wait a minute, I also want the functional. There's a consumer dilemma going over there. But yeah, I mean, for a European brand that's in food and beverages coming into Vietnam, an origin story is good, but it's no longer enough just to say we're Italian. You need a little bit more substance and authentic story behind that. And of course, a lot of people now looking at social proof. So, the whole, I honestly never thought this would really take off, but of course it has. The whole key opinion leader in social commerce is very much sought after and adds credibility and social proof points now as well. Trust is really interesting in food and beverage because a lot of imported product from Europe, it has no brand salience and familiarity. So there's a real relationship with the modern. You are by association getting the trust of that retailer, that you're a product. You've met all sorts of health standards that no one actually has yet, but I mean, you might have needed them to get the license to sell them in Vietnam, but the retailer certainly hasn't checked them. But that is, it's a very interesting relationship and ecosystem that's going on. Where the brand and the retailer really very much the brand early on benefiting from the retailer's level of trust. By the fact that they're stocked, they must be trustworthy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like foreign brands have really grasped this idea of the social commerce piece and how important it is for development in Vietnam at the moment? I mean, I tend to feel like I have a bit of a skewed view of this because I'm doing a lot of work in Korea, I'm doing a lot of work in China, and I'm working across Southeast Asia, where, of course, those are very much topics. Whereas in influencer marketing, of course, it's a topic especially in like beauty and skincare, that kind of thing in Europe, but it's less of a topic in food and beverage. It's less of a topic generally. And when you look online, I read some statistics the other week that how TikTok Shop has massively caught up with Shopee in Vietnam.
The number two, I think, now after Shopee.
The number two player. So that is a massive, really steep growth curve that they've gone through to reach that point.
Yeah.
Our European brands really,
2022, they were 4%. Now I think they're 14 or 16%. Yeah. So don't forget there's another interesting paradigm there, which is Shopee also has a live stream commerce.
Yeah.
Which we tend to forget. So a lot of Shopee's sales are driven through social commerce. Your question was, have European brands got it? No, not always, but some, yes. I mean, I certainly see brands like L'Oreal doing a fabulous job in their portfolio with social commerce. Key opinion leaders, consumer opinion leaders, and I see brands particularly in where it's a mother and baby category, typically baby care or baby feeding. They're doing pretty well and they're aware of what needs to happen there. No, for fresh produce, for general packaged functional foods or functional beverages, less so. It's, I was listening to somebody from TikTok a few months ago, telling the audience that he recommends that they have at least 6 hours of live stream a day. I mean, it's not just a sales channel, it's a performance channel and it's a marketing tell your story channel, but it requires a significant investment. And it's yet another added complication for marketing departments. And if you're an export marketer, that becomes quite hard. You need beyond distribution in the local market, right? You need somebody who's going to set up the e-commerce and social commerce platforms and content generation endlessly for you. So some, yes, and of course some of those practitioners, those agencies are obviously teaching their clients what they've got to do. But yeah, there's probably a long way to go. And it is in all sorts of weird and wonderful categories. It's no longer, for example, fresh produce. 4 years ago, we didn't see much online shopping for fresh produce, but it's very common today.
Yeah. And do you think that that imported brands need to localize more. I mean, on the one hand, you've got this kind of, it's always a difficult balance to get right, because the line is somewhere different in each market that you go into. That balance between I have British heritage or I'm Italian quality and playing on the origin story versus I do also need to localize to a certain extent in order to be accessible for the local market.
Yeah, so it's a dilemma that, you know, from those who might have a few bodies on the ground to those that have none of their own corporate bodies on the ground, really have to struggle with. But in essence, you know, you've got to keep, if you're really playing on an origin story and that's fundamental to your proposition, you can't localize that. You have to localize the things around that. The number one thing to localize is the pricing and the pack portfolio and how they go together is the number one thing. And then, of course, you know, packaging you can localize to an extent, tends to be on back of pack, you know, to make sure the consumer might be understanding a little bit more of your brand story, because you want your origin front and center remaining, you know, typically in English. And then, of course, promotions. So they can be localized. And also, you know, particularly with food and beverage, you know, area that's often missed is defining or tapping into the occasion for the consumer and the local occasion. So you can localize to the occasion that's relevant. You definitely need to localize packaging and often format and sizing with pricing strategy and promotions. They would be I think the keys to be localizing, but stay true to your proposition if that's what's holding your difference.
Yeah. No, I think it's very true that what you do, that you have to have that kind of core brand equity of this is what our company is about.
Yeah.
This is what we stand for.
This is why we're made in the hills of Italy or whatever it is. But
yeah,
yes.
But on the other hand, the way that you actually present that to a local audience is what you have to very much localize. And I think that there's often, and I'm sure you see it all the time, there's often a lot of tension there between the kind of global corporate organization and the distributor, especially when it's a distributor and not an own sales office. The distributor on the ground who's saying, well, I need maybe a different kind of packaging because we've got a tropical climate. I need a different packaging size because I'm selling into a specific vertical that requires me to have, I don't know, smaller packaging usually. And
you know, a more common one on that is, and let's go back to infant formula. Brand X, you know, premium brand, offers sachets, so I get to try it and see if my child likes it without investing in an 800-gram tin. Once my child has liked it, then I can invest in the more bulkier purchase.
And then you start to get into the ethics of WHO marketing codex for infant formula as to what you actually then charge for said sachet.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah. You touched upon pricing a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
What do you see?
The number one thing that people get wrong.
And what do they get? What do you see them getting wrong? Because I'm interested to see if your opinion is massively different to mine.
Okay.
Because sometimes it can be, can't it? It's
So I think, you know, we've alluded to quite heavily accessibility and price.
Yeah.
So therefore, you know, your SKU mix needs to have, you know, you need to take away the risk for people to try you if you're going to be new. So, you know, a lower price package point can be hugely beneficial, even for something premium. Number one. Number two, there's a lot of promotion activity. And if you're coming in from Europe and you are looking at an addressable market that is only modern trade and e-com, you will be asked for constant promotions to support the outlets. So have you built the promotional level, into your pricing architecture? That's another super area of importance. The other one, if you're going to be your addressable market, do you understand what the distributor needs in margin and what the retailer needs and what you might need to pay to be placed in that retailer? So there are the multiple levels there to understand, and the level of price sensitivity. There's 27,000 dong to a US dollar. You can be 1,000 dong off, and you just won't convert.
Yeah.
And that's on the pricing dynamics, I think, are where most people struggle and where they get it wrong.
Yeah. And I think that people also, and it's also worth mentioning, let's say, that in the past, if you were going in and you were assuming that you were going to work with your distributor in both modern trade and also the mom and pop stores, having that mix and knowing what that mix was going to be gave you a certain amount of extra leeway in the modern trade, because you knew that margins were going to be different there, that you had different possibilities, and more flexibility in some ways in traditional trade.
Right.
But that it was going to be very resource intensive to do the physical last mile deliveries, that you probably needed a distributor at least in every province. And you also had to think about the fact that they were probably going to be delivering your product on the back of, at least to some extent, on the back of a motorcycle. Does your packaging allow for that? Those kind of things that any exporter who doesn't have a full idea of their value chain down to the end consumer needs clip round the ear. If you
yeah, and it's convoluted, and I think a lot of people, a lot of sort of one brand type companies or one produce type companies, they're not used to that level of complexity, and they don't really think through those options. And there's a whole other point, which if we go back to the category you used to work in, price can be the number one signal for quality. So you really have to determine what part of the market you want to play in, and how you want pricing to aid your brand equity or otherwise. So yeah.
Although at certain times in the past, infant formula at least, and also other types of baby food, there was a certain amount of government interference as to how your pricing was allowed to look. Versus leader, precisely because of that question of accessibility and the fact that it is so critical that if a mother is working full time, then she needs to give formula to her child. And
to be honest, I know what you're referring to. It doesn't happen so often anymore. And if it does happen, it tends to happen to the largest domestic player, which is Vietnamese. There's still, you can still be 4 times the price of Vietnamese in infant formula as an imported brand here. So
and do you feel that there is a rise in strong local and regional players who are changing the game for imported food and drinks?
Changed a long time ago, to be honest. I would say 15 years ago was the real turnaround, where almost by being imported or even maybe manufactured here by a foreign brand or company, you were perceived to be better quality. And in fact, the company I mentioned earlier did a very good job, a very good strategic job at turning that around under the guise of, we are developing the best nutrition for our Vietnamese people. And I really think since that time, about 15 years ago, there are no end of Vietnamese brands who move much, much more quickly in innovation and bringing products to market. and understand all the things we've just discussed very well. That the differential is no longer what it was 15, 20 years ago at all, by a long way. It's not enough. You can't just be of foreign origin and expect to win share. You've got to be of foreign origin and very clever commercially to win share. Yeah.
And I think you also can't come in with that arrogance as a foreign brand of assuming that just because you're produced in Europe that you're better quality than the local players, because it might be the case, but it's not necessarily the case anymore.
That trend with domestic happened, it really was the turning point. My sense of timing may be a little off, but roughly 15 years ago. But in the last 5 years, something else has happened, which is we're seeing a lot more Thai companies and Indonesian companies come into the Vietnamese market and compete. And really, when you Indonesia, I have an office in, so I know very well. But there are a lot of big players in every sector in Indonesia. Here we've got in food, we've got Masan in food and beverages as a big local player.
Yeah.
In Indonesia, there's 4 or 5 big local players of significant size who've historically been very happy, focused on their own market, and have treated export purely as a ship it, export, but now coming into markets and fighting at a brand and a marketing level too. And they're certainly doing it here. So we're seeing a lot of food and beverage companies from Indonesia into Vietnam, some Thai companies, and also a lot of Thai companies investing in the modern trade retail environment as well. So there is a lot more competition.
Yeah. I mean, certainly when I'm looking around the region, I'm seeing especially a lot of Thai companies increasing their international activity generally. Also quite a lot from Malaysia. Indonesian companies, I'm seeing less of them doing that, but that is potentially because for them, Vietnam is a price sensitive market, so it's one where they can really compete very well on that.
Yeah, they're used to that accessible price point, sachets, smaller pack sizes. Yeah,
they're used to all of those kind of challenges, as it were, because they have them on a larger scale still.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that there are certainly some categories, like I've had projects in the past where we've looked at the Vietnamese market for as one of a range of markets that we've looked at for things like alcohol, where they've then said, Vietnam is one of those markets where taxes are still very high. I mean, obviously, Indonesia is a different ball game, but for other reasons. But there are easier markets than Vietnam for some categories, like alcohol. But I do also feel that Vietnam is getting more difficult as a first entry market for exporters, because I think that in the past, a lot of them, they came to Vietnam and they expected Vietnam to be cheap in terms of marketing, in terms of entry into their sales channels. And Vietnam isn't cheap in terms of marketing, because you need very intensive marketing. Individual things might not cost as much as they do perhaps in Germany or Italy, like an individual activity, but the level of intensity is pretty high. And entering into modern trade channels is not cheap in any market.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's cheaper to launch a brand it's still cheaper in Vietnam than Thailand, and it's still cheaper in Vietnam than Indonesia. I don't know enough about Malaysia to comment there, but it's. I guess the big difference is it certainly isn't easy. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not an easy market to navigate if it's your first foray into Asia, for sure. There are lots of things that present challenges. Yeah, but it's rewarding for those who can plan well, can get their pricing strategies right. We've got, on the basis of a good product. But yeah.
Which means that they have to come to the market and actually look at what is going on the ground.
Yes.
At the end of the day. Not just.
Yeah, I know a research company that can help them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, of course, many do. And some smaller players will use their trade and development boards of their countries. Or many will take a very traditional cycle. They start with, from afar, just exporting, then maybe appointing a distributor, and then maybe putting on a small marketing team on the ground, or appointing a marketing agency. I mean, it's if you're sat all the way in France or Italy, and and you're not a large corporate, then I understand the choices and the trade-offs that these people must have to make.
Yeah, it's always going to be difficult, I think, to enter into a market which is on the opposite side of the world to you. That is the reality of the situation. You've got that time zone difference, you've got cultural differences, you've got business practice differences, and you've also got something in your head as to what is your expectation or your assumption as to what is Vietnam like, or what is Indonesia. I think Indonesia is maybe even worse, because Indonesia people have, like most people have, like barley, and they don't have too much idea as to what the rest of
barley is in Indonesia. You and I know that, but yeah, I mean the
rest of that rather large country looks like.
People come to Saigon on business trips, and they're typically not moving at two square kilometers. Going to nice restaurants, everything's busy, nice hotels, everyone's lovely. My single best thing you can do if you're visiting a market is contact a company like mine and do an ethnography trip into a consumer home and follow them shopping, go into their home, see them using your product or the category, because that is the most eye-opening way to really understand that consumer. And observe first, ask later. But thing you can do, I think, is if you're looking at a market to export to get beyond the hype, when you're sitting in a cramped home and seeing the kitchen and how somebody actually uses your product, or what they might add to it, it can be quite revealing.
Oh yes, especially in a market where the food culture is so different to your own.
That's absolutely. Yeah.
So is that one of like the key things that if you were advising like a mid-sized European food and beverage brand who are looking to enter into Vietnam, that would be one of your key pieces of advice, right? If you're coming.
Absolutely, because I think it just pushes away all the hype and all that being in an exciting city and going out with your potential distributor and partners or whatever, and it gets you a real dose of reality. Spend a day doing that outside, maybe in the city, but not in the city's central business district, and just see those, get up close and personal with the people using your category and how they use it. And it will create all sorts of ideas and bring home, when the distributor turns around to you and tells you why they need packaging like that or sizing like that, they'll just bring it all home, and it will make perfect sense. That would be the one. That would be the first thing to do. To just decide, even if your product SKU can even fit to the market. If you have if it's a market you're going to be able to win in. Before you go out and do any elaborate, let's understand the landscape or route to market planning or all those sorts of things. But, all great things, but that would be the first thing, would be a hard dose of reality.
So just to summarize a little bit, because we are coming to the end of our time right now. So they should come in, visit, look at the real situation on the market, not just the nearest Aeon or Lotte, which is close to their rather expensive hotel somewhere in the center of, be it in Ho Chi Minh or be it in Hanoi, depending on what their situation is. They should take care to really do their due diligence, as it were. Where is the line to be drawn between what do they need to localize for, obviously for legal purposes? Where should they absolutely focus on doubling down on their local core brand equity?
Yeah.
Do the value chain. Do the value chain.
Do the value chain and decide the addressable market in that same process. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that people need to be realistic that if they are selling a product which is expensive in their home market to a market like Vietnam, there will be a market for it, but it might just be a small market.
Yeah, it'll be super. I mean, it'll be super niche. The A class in an urban Vietnam, that's people earning over $1,600 a month as a household, is 6%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to be a super premium product, expect to be niche, but that's okay. You just got to make sure that what you're investing will bring a return on that, on that addressable market.
If you're coming from a market which is the size of Austria, which is 9 million inhabitants totally, then that 6 million still looks like quite an interesting proposition. Yeah. If you're coming from a market where you're expecting, where you've only got that 100 million in your head and you're thinking that is where you're going to be, then you're going to be disappointed, aren't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Richard, thank you very, very much for joining me today. Just as a quick summary before we finish, because it looks like we haven't had any comments, and either we're talking to ourselves or we're not live on LinkedIn.
Nothing unusual for me there.
It's okay. At least in that case, it's better for you because I'm listening. But give us a very quick rundown what kind of services you offer and who should potentially reach out to you on the back of this if people are watching this on replay. I know
very quick rundown.
Market research is a big field,
Yeah, so it's market research. We basically help you, a potential client, make better choices by listening to your customers or the people you will be targeting as customers. And it could be a commercial decision like pricing or distribution, or a marketing decision like branding or packaging or communication. Just help you make better choices. You've always got choices. You've always got trade-offs. By speaking to your customers, potential customers, we can make sure you make the better choice, be more effective.
Thank you very much. I think that is an extremely valuable service. And I'm sure that far too many brands think that they can save a few pennies by not doing a lot of that work, because I see those things happen almost every week.
Yeah, I can tell you over the last 10 years, it's sort of, a lot of local brands who are big players, in their early years thought, oh, well, we're Vietnamese, we don't need market research. But, after a couple of failures, then they realized that, they can put in some pretty useful gateways which involve market research, which far improve their decision making and help them make those better choices. So
it's an objective third party, isn't it?
Well, it's the consumer, it's the person you work with, the voice of the consumer. It's okay, we interpret their voice, but I mean it's really your customers that you're speaking to. What's wrong with being closer to your customers, serving their needs? Yeah,
absolutely. What are you there for if you're not to get as close as possible, as close as reasonably possible to your consumers? I mean, as a brand, what more do you want?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Oh, okay. So on that note, I will say thank you to everybody who is hopefully listening to us talk here live. And thank you, Richard, for joining me today.
Thank you.